Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Dr. Cormier. I am a plant-based athlete, a plant-based doctor. I have been for more than a decade, a plant-based dad, and certified in plant-based nutrition. So today we're going to talk about what makes a food healthy or not. What makes us determine that eggs are healthy or are not, or red meat or certain plants. Now, people love to fearmonger with a lot of without putting much nuance into their statements. And I'll give you an example. We tend to use what we call food reductionism or nutritionism to reduce a food to its individual ingredients. Very often, in order to fearmonger, right? So certain people will avoid certain foods because they contain saturated fat. Certain people will avoid eating certain foods because they contain a conservative or preservative or an additive or an artificial flavor. Now, keep in mind that what makes a food healthy or not is the sum of all its ingredients. Food, we cannot reduce food to one single ingredient. We have to see food as its whole package and the sum of all of its parts. And a single food is not going to determine if you're healthy or not. It's your dietary pattern over time. Now, what you're doing for about 80 to 85% of your calories for about 80 to 85% of your time will likely determine your health outcomes much better than a single ingredient eaten occasionally. But people online tend to kind of use that as a way of pushing certain agendas, and typically it's just simply not based in science. So if we take a certain ingredient, we can use it to scare people away from certain foods, but we do not eat ingredients. We eat food as a package. All of the foods contain ingredients that are either health promoting or not, or sometimes just neutral and don't have much of a health impact at all. And what determines health outcomes will be a dietary pattern over time, because we don't just eat food, we eat meals, and these foods are eaten in combination, right? So it's very difficult to study if food is healthy or not. And one of the ways that we typically do it is through either prospective cohort studies where we simply watch people through time and observe over 10 years, for example, how these 10,000 people eat. And then we break down their dietary patterns into different groups or quartiles or quintiles, or this group ate more vegetables and lived longer, and this group ate more saturated fat and had more heart attacks. Typically, that's how we break down the process of determining a helpfulness of a food or of a dietary pattern. Now, most studies agree that the more whole foods that you put on your plate, the better your health outcomes will be. And typically, that means that the more percentage of your daily calories are coming from whole foods, specifically whole, minimally processed plants, the better your health outcomes will be. Um, it's very difficult to study foods against placebo. So what I mean by that is you can't really put broccoli in a pill and test it against placebo and then compare the outcomes of the two groups. You can do that with herbs and spices because typically they're strong enough to be studied or stuffed in a capsule and studied against placebo. So when it comes to studying whole foods, you really almost need observational data, which means just following people over time. Now, you can also pin certain dietary patterns against each other in a randomized controlled trial, and there are studies like that out there. You can also do what we call a food substitution analysis, where you determine a healthfulness of a certain food by replacing it with another and seeing if certain metabolic parameters get better or get worse. I'll give you an example. I often get the question, are eggs healthy? Now, the question should be, are eggs healthy compared to what? Now, if you take calories from bacon and you replace them with eggs, typically your health parameters are going to get better. Bacon is a class 1 carcinogen in the food group that we call processed meats. So replacing foods on the wrong side or the unhealthy side of the spectrum with foods that are further down the health spectrum will typically improve your health, right? But if you take eggs and you replace it with foods similar in their nutrient content, like for example, a bowl of oatmeal with a little bit of flaxseed or hemp seed, typically your health parameters will get better. So that's the way that we know that typically eggs are healthier than bacon, but probably not as healthy as maybe the equivalent in whole grains and healthy fats from flaxseed, for example. Same thing goes for a lot of different other foods. We know that food substitution analysis will show that if you're taking calories that you're obtaining from red meat, for example, and you switch it for plant protein, the same amount of calories from plant protein, your health parameters get better because you're adding fiber to your diet when you're doing that. You're adding anti-inflammatory compounds, antioxidants, polyphenols, other phytochemicals, and you're also reducing your intake of saturated fat, which is typically associated with poor health outcomes. So that's kind of how it works, where you can see at some point you can take whole plants and replace them by different types of foods like other whole plants, and there'll be a plateau or no change in health outcomes. That helps us put food healthfulness on a spectrum from typically ultra processed foods to processed meats to red meats to white meats to fish, dairy, and eggs, and then to whole plants on the end of the spectrum. That simply means that as you're trending towards this side, towards whole plants, you get healthier and healthier. The more calories you're eating from this side of the spectrum, the better. I choose to eat 100% plant-based, and I have been doing it for almost a decade, even more than a decade. But that doesn't mean that that's exactly your goal. For a lot of people, they can't imagine a life without meat or without dairy or without treats or without ultra processed foods. And that's okay if that's not your goal. Now, just keep in mind that if you want to push your health outcomes to its limit and improve it as much as possible, you would want to trend towards at least 80 to 85% of your calories from whole foods. But if that's not your goal and you're simply wanting to trend in the right direction, definitely reasonable to simply start just making switches where you're moving along the spectrum, or you're simply reducing the amount of calories that you're getting from ultra processed foods, red meats, and processed meats, and increasing the amount of calories that you're maybe getting from white meat, fish, dairy, and eggs, and whole plants. Now, I want the best for your health, and the maximal reduction in poor health outcomes will typically happen on a plant predominant diet. The science is pretty clear on that. But that doesn't mean that the occasional food that's maybe from the other side of the spectrum can't make it on your plate here and there. It can play a role in a healthy dietary pattern, right? A restrictive or extremist approach for a lot of people will usually be enough to turn them off and kind of can negatively impact sustainability when trying to get on a healthy diet. A lot of people, when they meet me, they say, oh my God, I could never go on a 100% plant-based diet. And that means that for them, making that change would come with a lot of friction, with a lot of negative things that they would lose, like losing food freedom, like losing freedom while vacationing, losing the instant gratification that comes with eating junk food. Maybe it impacts their social lives negatively. All of these things are valued differently by different people. Now, for me, I wanted to make sure that I could maybe keep doing these things even while I was transitioning. So, but I'm the type of person who sends emails to the restaurant to make sure that they can adapt their menu. I'm the person who researches where I'm vacationing to make sure I can find whole plant-based foods that are available. I'm the person who prepares by bringing food with me wherever I go, just in case I'm in a place where maybe I can't find healthy options. If that's not your goal, at least eating a plant-based meal per week, maybe even a plant-based day per week, or simply adding more healthy foods to the recipes that you already are eating could be a great first step. I definitely suggest that people consider veganizing their meals, meaning that meals that would typically contain animal products are simply subbed out with plant products. Like, for example, if you put your dairy in your smoothie, maybe try soy milk. If you put dairy in your cereal, in your oatmeal, maybe try plant milk. If you're cooking stir fries or soups, maybe throw in some whole grains or some lentils or some beans or chickpeas or pieces of tofu instead of meat. It is relatively simple if you know where to look, and if you can start by veganizing recipes that you're already eating regularly, it just makes it a little bit easier. So basically, what I'm saying is that there's a lot of fear mongering out there. We scare people out of avoiding certain foods because of certain ingredients, whereas the science says that it's what you're doing most of the time over the long term that's going to determine your health outcomes. Don't feel guilty in eating unhealthy foods here and there if your diet is based on a foundation of healthy plant foods. Now, that being said, start low, go slow, make small incremental changes. They will add up over time, starting by veganizing your meals, starting by adding foods instead of removing foods, simply saying that I'm going to add hemp seeds to something I'm already eating, add chia or flax, adding more greens to my soup, adding more legumes to my stir fry or my soup. Things that don't create much friction will tend to be much more sustainable at the end. By adding healthy foods to your diet, it typically crowds out the unhealthy ones, and over time, that transition is a little bit more seamless than doing it all of a sudden. Now, for those that are able to overnight flip their diet on its head and do a complete 180, I applause, I congratulate you. It takes a whole bunch of motivation. A lot of people who are really connected to their why, to the why that they want to change, will typically be a little bit more drastic, but the science tends to support going slow as a means of being sustainable. Right on. So I hope this helps. Please leave a like or a comment if you have any suggestions, or if you want to discuss what I talked about during this video. And I hope to see you at the next one. Thanks for tuning in. You have an awesome day. Peace.